My name is Ellen Moore, and I'm the Mining Program Director with Earthworks. And I wanted to start by just acknowledging that there's many impacts from nickel mining in Indonesia that threaten the environment, biodiversity, worker safety, and the well-being of Indigenous people and local communities. And all of these issues are really important. And for Earthworks, an organization that has supported communities impacted by mining for more than 30 years, the threat of tailings and waste is always at the top of our minds. In 2021, the Indonesian government said that it would no longer permit operators to use submarine tailings disposal. And this was really good news. However, it did not mean that the high-pressure acid leach facilities that process nickel ore into EV battery chemicals would not be built. So the question that we began to ask ourselves at Earthworks, and many others were asking this question as well, we were wondering, where would all of this extremely dangerous waste go? We knew that this waste would be a problem and a risk for communities and the environment. Unfortunately, the solution was adoption of so-called dry stack tailings facilities to store the waste. There's been a troubling lack of transparency about these facilities, as well as limited technical information about how the waste was being managed, what the risks are for workers and residents. And that's why we commissioned this technical study to gather more information about high-pressure acid leach in tailings facilities that currently exist, how much waste is being generated, are these dry stack or filter tailings technologies being used, what are the risks in Indonesia, and what needs to be done to keep the environment and people safe. So tragically, in the time that it has taken to complete and publish this research, tailings facilities have failed at the Indonesia Morrill Industrial Park, and workers have lost their lives. It's very clear that this is a critical issue in Indonesia and in other jurisdictions where the demand for minerals for renewable energy is paving the way for nickel mining and high-pressure acid leach processing under dangerous conditions using untested technology. We're grateful for the partnership with the Indonesian organizations who've endorsed the report and who are here today. We appreciate the opportunity to work together to share information and experiences and advocate for improved regulations, transparency, safety, and respect for community self-determination. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be speaking on filter tailings in Indonesia, the catastrophic failure of a disruptive technology. Slide 2. Thank you very much for that introduction, so I won't repeat that. Slide 3. That's just me testifying before the US Congress, and let's start with slide 4. Okay, so by 2024, Indonesia accounted for 59.5% and 9.7% of world nickel and cobalt production, respectively. And look especially at nickel over the last 10 years. From 2015, Indonesia has exploded from 5% of world nickel production up to almost 60%. If we look on the right-hand side for cobalt, Indonesia's share of world cobalt production has exploded from 1% to almost 10%. Slide 5. Now, most of this has been made possible by the very rapid introduction of high-pressure acid leaching in Indonesia. So 7 HPL projects opened between 2021 and 2025. This is just the beginning. 14 more HPL projects are permitted or under construction, and 12 more are in the proposal or the permitting phase. Slide 6. High-pressure acid leaching, which I'll just call HPAL from now on. This is used to extract nickel and cobalt from the limonite layer of a laterite ore. And we see a good photo on the lower right. Formerly, this was just regarded as overburden, just as waste that was removed to get to the saprolite layer at the higher nickel content. But with high-pressure acid leaching, nickel and cobalt can be extracted from this much lower grade ore. So HPAL produces 133 tons of tailings for every ton of metal. Tailings are the wet and the fine-grained waste that remain after mixed hydroxide precipitates of nickel and cobalt have been extracted. Slide 7. Okay, this is the problem that filter tailings are trying to address, which is failure by liquefaction, a common problem in conventional or wet tailings facilities. Okay, so what is this liquefaction? If we look on the on the left-hand side, we see a mixture of solids and water. In this picture, the solids are very loosely packed, but they touch each other. So solids are supporting the load. Okay, now let's go to the right-hand side and give this box a shake. So it tries to compact. After disturbance, the solids are no longer touching each other, so that the water is holding up the entire mass and the mixture behaves like a liquid. So this liquefaction, this is promoted by loose packing, that is a lack of compaction, and the pores between the tailings saturated with water. Okay, slide 8. Now, filter tailings technology tries to address this problem. It reduces the likelihood of failure. The filter tailings are partially dewatered to achieve an optimum water content for maximum compaction. Okay, this happens to be just a few percentage points below saturation. Now, because these tailings have been partially dewatered, they can be compacted into the tailings storage facility. That reduces the likelihood of liquefaction. Typical hard rock filter tailings have a water content of about 15%. They don't behave like a slurry, they behave like a moist soil. Okay, so far so good with filter tailings. Okay, now there's another expression that's used, which is really used almost exclusively in Indonesia, that is dry stacking. Okay, now dry stacking is not really a technical term. That's a marketing or a public relations expression. If the tailings were literally dry, which they're not, the tailings could not be compacted, the tailings piles would not be trafficable, and the dust would be unmanageable. Okay, now in Indonesia, all HPL projects use filter tailings technology. Because these tailings are so fine-grained, typical water contents are in the range 30 to 35%, so much higher than for filter tailings that come from hard rock mining. Indonesia is a very challenging environment for filter tailings technology. We have high rainfall, which can resaturate the tailings. Remember, I said the optimum water content for maximum compaction was just a few percentage points below saturation. Okay? Now, high rainfall can also erode away the filter tailing stack. And finally, the high seismic activity makes those wet tailings highly susceptible to liquefaction. Okay, now I want to connect this with another idea, which is disruptive technologies. This is a common feature of late capitalism. We are being surrounded by the disruptive technologies. These are innovations that are initially inferior or which target an underserved niche, but which rapidly replace existing technologies, often by offering some other advantage, such as convenience, affordability, accessibility, or image. Generative artificial intelligence is a disruptive technology. It certainly produces an inferior product, but it's very convenient. Okay, could have produced this presentation in seconds. Now, there's a motto which is very common among many disruptive technologies: move fast and break things. Here's the book with that title. That captures the dual nature of creativity and acting without regard to consequences, which of course is what I'll be discussing. Now, my thesis is that this combination of HPAL and filter tailings is a disruptive technology, and that has been and is leading to even more catastrophic failure. Okay, it's a disruptive technology that is not working. Okay, now HPL technology and filter tailings technology combine two concepts. First, we have the rapid expansion of nickel and cobalt production. that's needed for global conversion from internal combustion to electric vehicles. And second, filter tailings technology is less environmentally destructive than the alternatives. Thus, this combination of HPL technology with filter tailings technology represents the complete green package. And I don't say that as a compliment. Okay. I understand in Indonesia, they don't say warna hijau, green, which doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in English. I know it's much more common to talk about, say, energi bersih, clean energy in Indonesia. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk about first Sulawesi Island and then Obi Island. In Sulawesi Island, there's been the ongoing catastrophic failure in the Indonesia Morrill Industrial Park. Okay, March 16th, 2025. That was actually the first known case of liquefaction of a filtered tailings storage facility. So here on the top, we see the liquefied tailings flowing through a breach of the filtered tailings storage facility of PT HYNC. Bottom left, those tailings flow down the Toety River toward the Banda Sea. Bottom right, we see the liquefied tailings plus floodwater from the Toety River overflowing onto the site of PT Fajar Metal Industry. Now, if we look at Google Earth imagery from January 3rd, 2025, if we look on the left-hand side, that clearly shows a landslide from the filtered tailings storage facility operated by PTHYNC with clearly defined channels for tailings to travel to the Toety River. Thus, it appears that at least one collapse of this tailings facility occurred even before that collapse on March 16th, 2025. Okay, March 22nd, 2025, a landslide occurs at the filtered tailings storage facility of PTQMB New Energy Materials. At the bottom, we see excavators searching for 4 missing workers. 1 survivor was found, 2 bodies, a 3rd body was never found. So 3 fatalities from this landslide. A month later, April 30th, 2025, another landslide at the filtered tailings storage facility of PTQMB. If we look at the right, there's a bulldozer engulfed by a landslide at an unknown filtered tailings storage facility in September 2023. Most recently, February 18th of this year, another landslide at the same filtered tailings storage facility with the death of 1 worker. Okay, the response by the mining company, P2MB, to the fatalities of last year, this is what they said in English. This was an extraordinary natural disaster classified as a once in 50 years rainfall event where the resulting floods and landslides were beyond human control. Okay, now that actually doesn't make any sense. Heavy rainfall can never be the cause of failure of an engineering facility that's supposed to be designed to withstand the expected rainfall. The failure is a failure of design. And in any event, designed for a 50-year event, that's an event that has a probability of exceedance of 2% in any given year. That's literally appropriate for the storm drains at a shopping mall. An engineered facility for which failure would result in the loss of life should be designed to withstand a 10,000-year event. That is an annual exceedance probability of 0.01%. Okay, so what was the response of the Indonesian government? They gave an award for environmental protection to the Indonesia WALHI Industrial Park. Okay, now I'm going to go to Obi Island and especially look at the PTHPL dry stack facility. And I'm going to talk about its imminent catastrophic failure. Now, insight into design and construction was obtained through 4 key documents and their sequence of revisions. And I'll mostly be discussing this document on the right, which is called Independent Technical Assessment Report of the PTHPL facility. Sorry, that was a little hard for me to read. Okay, So let's look at what this report says. 1.5 years after the beginning of operation of the dry stack tailings facility, the drainage structure had still not been completed. Okay, remember I said these dry stack facilities, filter tailings storage facilities, have a water content in the range 30 to 35%. So the drainage system is very important. Okay, the report says how the discharge of these 2 points drains away from the dry stack tailings facility is unclear. Okay, they don't even understand how the drainage system works. It was also noted that part of the drainage infrastructure was still under construction. Okay, this report tells us that the dry stack tailings facility was constructed virtually without any quality control. Although the target water content was 35%, the actual water contents range from 8 to 36%. That is, they very rarely got the water content they needed to compact the tailings. Although the target compacted density was 2.20 metric tons per cubic meter, the actual compacted densities range from 0.93 to 2.20 metric tons per cubic meter. Now, what the consulting report did not say is this is a problem that cannot be fixed. This problem cannot be repaired even by carrying out perfect quality control from now on. At any moment, the tailing stack could suddenly attempt to compact, leading to liquefaction. The dry stack tailings facility was constructed without virtually any monitoring. Okay, this is a quote from the report. The design specifies a number of monitoring regimes required for operation of the facility, such as groundwater monitoring via vibrating wire piezometers and standpipes, toe seepage measurements with V-notch weirs, regular surveys and installation of inclinometers, provision for cone penetration test investigations once the dry stack tailings facility reaches certain heights, water quality, and meteorological monitoring. It is noted that no evidence has been provided as to whether any of the controls have been implemented. So essentially, the facility has no monitoring. Okay. The report also said that the dry stack tailings facility was constructed without virtually any adherence to design. It was also noted that part of the drainage infrastructure was still under construction. I'm sorry, I've been forgetting to tell you the slide numbers. We're on slide 25. Perimeter toe drain issues identified, and some areas are still under construction. Water treatment ponds in poor condition, and some areas are still under construction. Slide 26. The report concluded that failure is an uncontrolled risk. The risk assessment said there are uncontrolled risks, which it listed as the dry stack tailings facility failure, erosion of the dry stack tailings facility, and spillage of contact water. So we asked the question, what happens after failure of the dry stack tailings facility? Slide 27. In this report, there's a dam break analysis, which is completely unrealistic. We see a very limited distance and this very irregular ponding. This limited distance and irregular ponding that's predicted by their computational flooding map results from an incorrect topographic model that creates fictitious barriers to flow. For example, looking at a bridge and modeling that as if it were a concrete barrier. The most likely scenario is that the tailings will enter an unnamed stream less than 600 meters downslope from the dry stack tailings facility and then flow westward to the Maluku Sea with crossing of considerable mining infrastructure and overtopping of the stream channel onto the village of Kawasi. Slide 28. Now, I'm going to talk about something very important we need to follow carefully. And this is the way in which this consulting report by SRK Consulting gradually modified their conclusions so that at the end, they said the opposite of what they started saying. So let's look at the beginning, revision 1. We see a diagram that says view of the dry stack tailings facility with significant water ponding. Okay, this is what they say. And notice the part that's in boldface, I'm emphasizing. During the site visit, some issues with water ponding and poor drainage appeared to be present, and they refer to this diagram, figure 911. The design considered that the compaction imposed on the tailings would be sufficient to prevent liquefaction. However, it is SRK's opinion that given the height of the facility, 57 meters, the lack of quality control in the placement of tailings, and the observed surface water issues, further study is required to assess the risk for the tailings to exhibit contractive behavior during undrained shearing. Okay, they're very concerned about this surface ponding. And let me explain why. Surface water on top of a filtered tailings storage facility is a very serious issue for at least 5 reasons. Okay, ponded water can lead to erosion and washout of the filtered tailings stack. Areas with ponded water cannot be compacted because those areas are not trafficable. Attempts to compact saturated materials or materials that are significantly wetter than the optimum water content for maximum compaction can lead to materials with very little shear strength, which would lead to reduced stability. Thus, the newly deposited tailings could not be adequately compacted even if surface water could be moved from one part of the filtered tailings stack to another in order to allow for the passage of heavy equipment. Okay, next, saturated tailings can potentially liquefy, especially if they were never properly compacted. And finally, if a collapse of the filtered tailings stack did occur, the presence of free water would promote flow behavior of the released tailings. Okay, so a very serious problem. Okay, it's also serious because what it indicates about the construction of the filtered tailings stack. Okay, so why would it happen that we could have surface ponding? There could be improper filtering of the tailings so that water contents are too high. There could be stacking of the tailings during high rainfall, and that could result from a lack of space for temporary storage of tailings during periods of high rainfall. Could be insufficient sloping of the surfaces to promote runoff, or could be insufficient drainage infrastructure within the filter tailings stack. Okay, so very serious in terms of consequences and construction. Okay, let's go back to look at what is being said throughout the revisions of this report. Okay, so now we're looking at the draft after revision 1. Okay, and that photograph we looked at is now that much smaller photograph on the lower right. This is slide 31. Okay. Now, so the large photo is made much smaller and the caption is changed. Now it says view of dry stack tailings facility area with water ponding issues. Okay. The report still states essentially the same conclusion. During the site visit, some issues with water ponding and poor drainage appeared to be present. The design considered that the compaction imposed on the tailings would be sufficient to prevent liquefaction. However, it is SRK's opinion that given the height of the facility, 57 meters, the lack of quality control in the placement of tailings, and the observed surface water issues, are further studies required to assess the risk for the tailings to have contracted behavior during undrained shearing. Okay, the key passages are in boldface. Okay, now, the big change occurs in revision 8A, okay? Now, if we look at the lower right, we see that same photo. It's much smaller. Now it's been changed. It just says now, view of dry stack tailings facility area. It doesn't say anything about surface ponding. And whatever is in bold has been removed. What's been removed? The phrase, during the site visit, some issues with water ponding and drainage appear to be present. That is now gone, okay? And the phrase, and the observed surface water issues, that is now gone. Everything about surface water ponding is now gone. All that remains is the caption with no explanation, okay? If we look at the track changes comparison between revision 8 and 8A, this is slide 33. we see exactly where those key passages were removed. Okay, now on slide 34, here is the final, that is version 9. Okay, nothing remains of the surface ponding issue except the small photo with no mention of ponding, no mention of poor drainage, no mention of any surface water issues. Okay, so these are the take-home messages I'm giving you. First, it's tempting to conclude that filter tailings technology simply does not work in Indonesia. I am not coming to that conclusion because, at the same time, it's difficult to escape the other conclusion that no one has really tried very hard to make the technology work. In particular, the practices that have been carried out at the PTHBL project would scarcely be suitable to make the simplest technologies work under the most hospitable circumstances. And finally, the safest pathway forward is not to give up on filter tailings technology, but to continue with filter tailings technology with the intention of doing it properly. This is the last slide, 36. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya dan terima kasih kepada organisasi-organisasi yang telah bekerja sama. Saya akan dengan senang hati menjawab pertanyaan apapun.
So now we're going to move on to the next presentation. I'd like Ibu Tuti Astuti Kilwu, or you can call Tuti. She's the director of WALHI, North Maluku, who's just been appointed, but she's been in the field since 2011. And she also a lecturer and fiction writers. One of the books that are also quite popular is Tabobo. Yeah, so Resus Books, 2006. So I'll give you 15 minutes to explain what is going on there in North Maluku and how the tailing management in North Maluku, especially the Obi Island. So please, 15 minutes, yeah, please. So thank you so much. I hope my voice can be heard from your side. Thank you, everyone. So let me speak in Indonesian. And I have the PowerPoint here. So this is a nickel catastrophe. The title is The Myth of Welfare and the Reality of the Catastrophe of Ecology in Kawasi. So I represent the people of Kawasi who live near Harita Nickel. The title of my presentation today is a nickel catastrophe. It's a myth of welfare and the reality of ecology catastrophe in the Kawasi village. And we just listened to Dr. Emerman regarding the new technology actually cause the more production of tailing. Now, how that tailing has affected the people and what has been done to deal with it. So in Kawasi is a small village. It's around 3.11 kilometers square, and it is on Obi Island, which is actually 3,000 kilometers square. So it is actually not included, not considered as a small island, because small island in Indonesia, it means smaller than 2,000 kilometer per square. So Obi is not categorized as a small island, but is medium size. And there are several islands around that area, and the burden of the nickel mining there is just too much. It's more than it can bear. And so there's a concession rights, but it's just too much for this area. In Kawasi, in 1995, there was Antam TBK is also on nickel exploration. But then this company was closed in 1998 because of the monetary crisis. And then it was followed by reformation in Indonesia. And then the permit was taken by the government in the Obi Island in 2008, and then Harita Group came. Uh, the right was released. The permit was released for Harita Group in around 2008. So Antam left, and then Harita came. So this is a visualization near the Obi Island. So it's like into the ocean. So it's in the shore. It's crazy mining there. So hundreds of hectares of mangrove was taken, like eradicated, wiped out. So now this the crisis, weather crisis in Indonesia, in this region now, and then fossils energy uh, fell, and then now there is a transition of energy. So it is quite understanding that we have running out of fossil fuels. Now it's a time of transition. And then because of that, there's a lot of demand of nickel, which is the main material for electric vehicle. And they also require a lot of human resources as well. So there's this reason to do this. They say that we have energy transition, but there is another crisis because of that. For example, the weather change, especially in Halmahéra's southeast Halmahera, and then the people also lose water sources, and as well. So in Kawasi, actually, they have limited electricity and limited water there, especially who live in the villages near the mine. And then the streets, the roads are not accessible, and welfare or it's never happened. And then some people protest demo to the company, but then they get some kind of love letter from the company. This is kind of the housing. So it's the mine is inside the village or the village is inside the mine. We're confused to see this photo. So the activity of mining in Obi Island, they cut trees and they change the water flow, and then they fill the shore and the sea, and then they take soil, and then they cut hills and mountains, and then they build smelters and so on. This is a photo of the mining site of Kawasi. And then what is happening to the people? And what is happening is land grabbing, yeah, done by the company. If they don't sell their land, then there's intimidation from the company. And then they negotiate because the land is already grabbed anyway. So, and then because of that, the land is changed to different function, and therefore people lose their jobs. So they say that they're going to need a lot of human resources, but actually there are more unemployment there. Living costs becomes higher because we need to buy fossil fuels, and then 100 and something, 35 or something, fishermen struggling to feed their families. First is deforestation is massive, and there's a lot of flooding there now. So there are more flooding happens more often now. For example, 2 to 4 times in a month. So yeah, 2 to 4 times, and the water depth is between 1 to 3 meters. And then after the flood, there's mud left. And then since the sediment pond was built, then water floods our villages. ISPA means like breathing problems increase every year. This is the illness of the most common illness in Pulau Obi now is breathing problems, illness. So especially for children and babies, 1,500 cases of breathing illness in Pulau Obi now. And then women. Women is the group that is mostly affected by the mining activities. They lose their space to live, and then because their living area shrink, and they cannot work in the mine because the male work there, it is more like a male job, so they cannot work. And woman needs to bear all the burden of taking care of the family because they're polluted. Regarding relocation, the culture, yeah, if you move people from one place to the other, they will lose their identity. So on the other side, uh, the mine needs to have more and more land, wider land, and then they push the people away. And they say that because we are going to expand our mine, so we need to move you like this. So I think in this case, they are actually the reason of the catastrophe, but they think the people need to move. This is the water source. This is a kind of well in our place. It's like this, but the well is submerged in water. So this is one of the wells. Now it's flooded. And now about the we are fighting. They don't want to release their land. They don't want to give their land away. So they blockade the equipment, the heavy equipment, and then they close the road, and then they rally in companies and the local government, the district government, provincial government, and even the House Parliament. And this campaign, uh, so this solidarity, also publication, they also trying to do all of this. And this one is how the flood in a school, and the company uh, intimidate after that. They also send the police or army, and people to, and then they also terrorize people who they think are very active. And then, yeah. Thank you, Amien.
Said, I am going to close us out today with looking towards what needs to change to address these risks that are being posed by HPAL tailings facilities in Indonesia. And so, as we heard from Dr. Emerman, there's an extreme build out of this industry that is having impacts on communities that is not being properly designed and monitored, and that is not being regulated and audited. We've heard from Toety and Richard about how those impacts are affecting communities, water, ecosystems, workers at the mines and the risks that they face. So what becomes clear is that we need to see changes in a number of different areas in order to address these risks, to protect communities and the environment, and to keep workers safe. So Earthworks, together with WALHI South Sulawesi, WALHI Southeast Sulawesi, WALHI North Maluku, Tanah, Merdeka, Puspaham, Satyabhumi, and AER have developed a set of recommendations for government, for mining companies, for purchasers of metals like automakers, and for investors. And we believe that there needs to be significant and urgent changes made to ensure that these catastrophes and harms that we are seeing do not continue in the future, and that communities and ecosystems don't pay the price of the green energy expansion and the nickel build out. So I'll start with recommendations for the Indonesian government. First and foremost, the government must hold mining companies accountable for these dangerous practices. It should enact a moratorium on the development and permitting of new facilities and close the regulatory gaps that exist in current laws and statute in order to protect communities and the environment. So this should happen through stopping the disposal of tailings in facilities that have documented risks. The government should carry out safety audits to ensure that facilities are improving their practices and reducing these risks, and these audits should be done by independent auditors, not part of the mining companies. There should be a pause on permitting of new and proposed projects until the gaps in regulation can be addressed. And there should be specific standalone tailings laws in Indonesia that protect the environment, communities, and workers, and make sure that there's a regulatory system that addresses the risks we've identified. The Indonesian government should also require mining companies to meaningfully engage with communities around the mines. As we've heard from presentations, communities are being forced off their land. They don't have access to information. They don't understand the impacts of the mine in their area. And so there needs to be a process in which communities have access to information that's transparent in the language that they understand, in a way that they can understand, so that they can make decisions around whether or not to accept the risks of tailings facilities. And so the government needs to prioritize this access to information and transparency. And the government should work together with communities to co-design emergency response plans. So as we heard from Richard, workers' lives are being put on the line because of dangerous tailing storage practices. And so emergency planning should happen together with workers and communities to protect people in the case of an emergency. The government should develop and implement a standard for relocation and resettlement that's in line with international guidance and prioritizes the protection of communities. So we heard from Toety about the land grabbing and the forced displacement of communities. The government needs to protect communities first and foremost, and not put them at the expense of corporate priorities. And then the government should engage with labor unions to improve the health and safety standards for mine workers. And lastly, the government should codify its ban on submarine tailings disposal. So as Ellen mentioned at the top of this webinar, there is a de facto ban on new facilities dumping mine waste into the ocean. This should be put into law and put into practice. Mining companies also have responsibility in these circumstances, right? So for mining companies, they should be providing transparent information that is publicly accessible to all communities, workers, and other stakeholders. And they should also provide access to independent technical experts like Dr. Emerman or other mining engineers or specialized scientists that can help communities understand what's really happening and what are the impacts of the mining operations where they live. They should meaningfully engage communities in their local languages in an accessible manner and that they should provide accurate, transparent, and timely information when it's requested. Mining companies should recognize the cultural, territorial, and self-governance rights of Indigenous peoples, and recognize also and implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples by honoring FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent for all tailings facilities. And they should implement site-level independent grievance mechanisms so that when communities and workers identify human rights abuses or environmental concerns, they have a trusted way to file complaints, and those complaints are addressed in an adequate, effective, and prompt manner. Mining companies should voluntarily and transparently participate in all oversight and management and compliance activities required by the Indonesian government, and should implement policies that only relocate communities with their full consent and via a participatory process where the community that is to be relocated has the final decision-making power and is able to decline or accept the terms of relocation. So no forced relocation. And companies should implement water quality monitoring programs to show that they are not having an adverse impact on water quality and water quantity. And if there are impacts, they should take steps to remediate the harms that they have caused. And then lastly, they should implement internal policies to prohibit the use of deep sea tailings proposal. And then where failures have occurred and where risks are imminent, mining companies should immediately take action and stop disposing of tailings into those facilities until the risks and dangers have been addressed. Like I mentioned, we also have recommendations for automakers and other downstream purchasers of metals. Automakers and purchasers of metals have responsibility in the supply chain. So they should initiate internal investigations into the tailings risks of the nickel in their supply chains, proactively initiate these investigations. And where there are safety concerns or other concerns, the purchasers of metals, the companies buying metals, should engage with the mining companies to improve safety. And if mining companies do not improve their safety, then the purchasing companies should stop their business relationship with the mining companies. So it's incumbent that the companies throughout the supply chain are taking responsibility to hold mining companies accountable for dangerous practices. And this should all be done using international best practice like the UN Guiding Principles of Business and Human Rights and the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises. And purchasing companies of metals and minerals should also work with and request that the Indonesian government audit mining companies to ensure that their tailings facilities are not posing a risk to communities, workers, and the environment. And then lastly, again, investors also have a role to play. So investors should also initiate internal investigations into the tailings risks in their portfolios. And they should work with mining companies to improve safety. Again, in the cases where mining companies do not change and do not improve the conditions of their tailings facilities in Indonesia, investors should no longer continue to invest in those projects. And lastly, again, investors should work with the government and request that the government carry out these safety audits as well to ensure that they are not investing in dangerous facilities. So there's a lot of changes that need to happen. And we believe that without these significant changes, the risks to Indonesian communities and the environment will continue. And so we look forward to working with our partners in Indonesia to push for these changes across the spectrum. Thank you, Amien.
The first one is about government. That our recommendation that the government should stop any issues if we have a grievance or any issues found. So we need to stop that. And the government should strictly focus on these issues. If not, the government should stop their license. So I think the research that has been done, we have been done today, has been reflected the failure of government Indonesia, especially on the tail issues in Indonesia. And then the government should uh, improve their policies on society, especially on the accountability, transparency, so that the community and all parties can monitor all the activities on the tailing management in Indonesia. And then about the standard of the tailing management in Indonesia. Just now has been explained the expansion on nickel, which has been massively expanded. The plan has been increased also. However, there is no specific policy from the government on this kind of tailing management, and there is no even policies on how government of Indonesia uh, manage the issues on tailing. In fact, Indonesian government would like to produce more battery, but the process they neglect, or even they don't really care about the issues on tailing, which is very dangerous on the local community. So here is the recommendation from Jan. Also for the companies, the companies should also enforce the strict environmental management. Nickel is for the international community. So although it is conducted in Indonesia, but they should also follow the international rule or international standard, because we are the international community. Another urgent thing is the company who produce transportation car uh, nickel in Indonesia. So they they get lucrative income from this. So that's why these companies should be responsible and should open any information, yeah, especially in Indonesia. And also for investors, they have explicitly explained that for the funder, all parties will provide contribution on fund. Yeah, the investors should also conduct a preventive action. Yeah, a clear preventive actions in order that their investment, yeah, so that their investment will not sacrifice the community in Indonesia. So thank you so much, Jen, who has provided some powerful recommendation, which is very objective. I think all of us, especially for me, yeah, this recommendation is very relevant. Yeah, especially for our Indonesian government and also the companies. There are some HPAL industries will be constructed in Indonesia. But what we have clearly found is there are two HPAL industries will be constructed in Sulawesi Island. So based on this research, this is really useful for us, yeah, especially for everyone who live in Southeast Sulawesi, so that they can understand regarding the tailing management in Indonesia and how is our recommendation is. Also, I think it is very clear from Jan, yeah, which has strictly enforced government. to create a technical recommendation, technical policies on Indonesian tailing management. Yeah, because it is very dangerous. Yeah, as has been found by the researchers, as and for all parties who has working uh, on these issues.
Sure, yeah, yeah, thank you. So today is the official launch of the report. We have not shared it with the Indonesian government yet, but we are working with our partners in Indonesia, WALHI South Sulawesi, South East Sulawesi, North Maluku, Tanah, Merdeka, and Puspaham to get this report in front of the different ministries within agencies within the government that are regulating tailings. We are also sharing the report with a number of automakers that we know are sourcing nickel from Indonesia. Some of them were provided the right to reply on the report, so they did see an early version of it. And their responses are available on our website where the report is published. But we will also be organizing a similar webinar specifically for automakers and metals purchasers and investors next month. So we're doing a lot of targeted outreach to investors and car companies to make sure that they understand the risks in their supply chains and their portfolios. So you all are the first to kind of see the report in public in its entirety, but we will be continuing this work to make sure that our recommendations and these important findings from Dr. Emerman are in front of the decision makers who are overseeing this tailings build out in Indonesia.
Oh, okay. So these are very interesting questions. Let me start with this question of environmental impact assessment. Typically, these are very difficult to come by in Indonesia. For this PT-HPL project, I have never seen an environmental impact assessment. For all those projects in Indonesia, Morrill Industrial Park, I've never seen an environmental impact assessment. I don't know how you would find them. Nobody I work with has been able to find them. I have seen such an environmental impact assessment sometimes, mostly for the DPM lead zinc mine on North Sumatra. And this environmental impact statement was quite lacking. For example, according to Indonesian tailings regulations, you have to do a dam break analysis. You have to show what would be the consequences of failure if the tailings dam fails. And for this DPM lead zinc project, even though it was having a tailings dam, that kind of analysis was never done. Okay, so usually you can't find these environmental impact assessments, and the one I've seen have been quite deficient. Okay, in terms of what ought to be done, there certainly has been a lack of study of the foundations of these filter tailings storage facilities. Okay, now just to give an example, when that facility failed at the PTQMB filter tailings storage facility in March of 2025 with 3 fatalities, when they were excavating with bulldozers to try to find the buried workers, a pond formed. Okay, as they were excavating, they encountered a pond, meaning the pond was there all along. Okay, meaning that they had constructed the facility on top of a spring, on top of flowing underground water. And that definitely violates industry standards. That's something that should never be done. Very common issue, this was the case with the DPM mine also, is there was no study of the foundations in terms of what happens when you put this big mass of material on top of soft or unconsolidated volcanic ash. And I haven't seen that kind of foundation study ever done in the case of Obi Island. And was that all of the questions? That was it. Okay, so I'll let Jan answer the next question.
Thank you, Dr. Emerman. I'm going to pass to my colleague Ellen.
Sure, thank you. On the question of sharing the technical report, Dr. Emerman's report, the recommendations with IRMA, in the case of Harita, which is undergoing an audit currently with the Initiative Responsible Mining Assurance, or IRMA. We think this is definitely a report that would be interesting and important for the IRMA Secretariat to see, and we will share it with them, and similarly useful and important for the audit team to see as well. So yes.
So, bringing this report to the government is our job. We have discussed very loud, Earthworks and Dr. Emerman. Yeah, we will encourage, yeah, and in terms of the investors and also the company who create transportation. And our role here is that to push to encourage government to improve the tailing management in order to save the community. So this is going to be our argument and our justification for the government and also for the mining companies who has been running. We cannot neglect them who has been ongoing running. Yeah? Yeah, of course, this is very risky for the safety of the workers and also local community. But the way to force the mining company is not from us, but from the government. Based on this report, we can also ask the government to create a strict regulation to this tailing management. And also we need evaluation and monitoring and evaluation to create a strict law enforcement, yeah, especially for the company who has been failed in implementing this tailing management, especially all the impacts it has been creating from this tailing. So our plan after this launch, next month, we are going to gather in Jakarta with national network and bring raise this issue to the government.
Okay, so these are very good questions. I know you've asked for one, but I think I need to give you two big problems. The first is overall. I think many people would want to say, well, filter tailings, dry stacking just doesn't work in Indonesia, and we need to go to ocean dumping or something. And I completely reject that conclusion. My overall theme of my report is that no one has actually tried very hard to make filter tailings work. Okay, so two things I want to draw your attention to. The first is in consulting reports, instead of addressing problems and showing what the problems are and what needs to be done to solve these problems, the consulting reports just hide the problems. Okay, that's why I kind of devoted so many slides to that one report that first shows, look, we have surface ponding. We have water sitting on top of the filter tailings storage facility. This is a very serious issue. But gradually that report just made it go away. So by the end of the report, you don't even know that happened. All you're left is a photo with no caption and everything removed out of the text. Okay, that's got nothing to do with whether filter tailings work in Indonesia. That kind of attitude is not going to work under any circumstances. And the second thing is the complete lack of any quality control in building these filter tailing stacks. Okay, you're supposed to filter the tailings to get the optimum water content for maximum compaction. That's the whole point of filter tailings. But what this report was showing is there hasn't been any quality control whatsoever. The tailings just come out of the filter presses with any water content, and they do the best to compact it, and that's the end of it. And this is not going to work under any circumstances. And this has got nothing to do with the high rainfall or the seismic activity in Indonesia. This is just very poor practice. Basically, it's very poor engineering. It's the worst level of engineering. I'd say those are the two most important things.
So, is there any effort for that? So far, we have planned some strategic plan for, especially for advocacy. Yeah, especially what happened right now. We are not only disseminating the report, but we also raise the information for the government. At the moment here in Sulawesi, so we call it green advocate. Yeah, we have so that's are all the strategy that we need to do with, of course, with the support from the media, the proof, not only reports, but there is a clear proof from the field. And also there is involvement, community involvement to support our justification. To prove that the company has been failed. Although we know that there is a good relationship between government and also company, yeah, investor and so on. Yeah, we know that, yeah, they have a good relationship. Yeah, we know that there is an issues on the regulation for especially in North Maluku. Yeah, WALHI basically have a legal standing on this. But in North Maluku, we haven't got any experience to sue the company. We haven't done any sue to the company here in North Maluku. But we have a plan over the year to do, yeah, yeah, we will do a lawsuit, yeah, under WALHI, yeah, regarding all the disaster occurred, like floods, especially in Solihi village. Moreover, we also do a coordination with the lawyer. Yeah, the lawyer who do the human rights issues. Yeah, in order to support our advocacy. Yeah, in North Maluku. And also we also have a network and coordination with lawyer in ASL, especially in national level. Yeah. Yeah, especially for the demand for the compensation. Yeah, there should be a strict lawsuit for that. Yeah, so we are talking about the compensation. So yeah, it's supposed to be directly done by the local community because they are involved in that intimidation. Yeah. So especially for the community who have a legal standing, who got, yeah, we need to make sure their safety from the threat. So I think that's all for me.